Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today's story is about gas, but it's really about power, because Europe is trying to ban Russian gas on a schedule. Russia is now openly floating the idea of cutting Europe off first. And right as this happens, the global LNG market gets punched in the face by a Middle East shock. So the question isn't who is right. The question is who actually has leverage when molecules disappear. Let's break it down calmly, because this topic is full of emotional slogans and almost no arithmetic. What happened? Putin floats, "We can just stop supplying Europe." In early March 2026, Russian President Vladimir Putin publicly suggested that Russia could stop supplying gas to Europe now, instead of waiting for Europe to phase it out. The key detail, he framed it as a thought, not a signed decision. Right after that, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said Russia is discussing redirecting LNG exports away from Europe toward Asia-Pacific partners. So, we're not looking at a finished policy. We're looking at a political signal with real market consequences. And signals matter in energy, because energy contracts are built on one fragile thing: trust that tomorrow's delivery will happen. The missing context: Europe already passed a legal phase-out plan. Most commentary skips the timeline, but the timeline is the whole story. The EU has already finalized a legal framework to phase out Russian gas. Restrictions for LNG under certain short-term contracts beginning April 25, 2026. Short-term pipeline contracts banned from June 17, 2026. Long-term LNG contracts banned from January 1, 2027. Long-term pipeline contracts ending September 30th, 2027, with a possible extension to November 1st, 2027, in specific storage-related cases. This wasn't a rumor, it's in official EU communications and the adopted legal approach. Hungary and Slovakia have been openly hostile to this and have signaled legal challenges. Reuters also notes Hungary's plan to challenge the measure. So here's the against the frame angle. Europe's plan assumes a controlled divorce. Russia's threat is basically, why wait to be dumped in 2027 if you're already treating us like a criminal in 2026? Why this matters? The EU phase-out schedule was built on assumptions. The phase-out logic assumes replacement volumes appear. It assumes LNG growth from the US. It assumes Qatar expansion stays on track. That's why the EU timetable matters. It was set with the belief that new supply will show up. Now watch what happened this week. The new shock. Qatar halts LNG, declares force majeure. Qatar is not a small supplier. Qatar is a pillar of the LNG system. In early March 2026, QatarEnergy declared force majeure and halted LNG production at its 77 million ton per year facility amid escalating conflict and attacks. Reuters describes Qatar as supplying about 20% of global LNG and notes it could take weeks to months to resume normal deliveries, even if the conflict ended quickly. That means the global replacement cushion got smaller, exactly when Europe is trying to cut Russian supply. And the consequences aren't theoretical. Reuters reported Europe faces a storage refill scramble, needing around 700 LNG cargoes, 67 BCM this summer, about 180 more than last year, with storage levels projected well below the 5-year average. So the EU plan to ban Russian gas is walking into a market that just lost one of its biggest stabilizers. Second shock, Israel suspends Leviathan. Egypt's LNG balance flips. At the same time, Israel ordered Chevron to shut down the Leviathan field due to conflict conditions, which disrupts regional gas flows. Bloomberg reported Egypt is seeking to bring forward LNG imports and buy more cargoes after Israel shuttered fields. Translation: when Egypt needs more LNG, that's more competition for the same global cargoes Europe wants for storage. Now combine Qatar offline or partially offline, extra LNG demand pressure from regional disruptions, Europe trying to refill storage and phase out Russian gas. That's the background to Putin's "maybe we stop now" line. This isn't just politics, it's timing. What Europe actually needs, the demand is down, but the dependency is still real. Europe did cut gas demand after the crisis, but cut doesn't mean free. The EU's gas demand declined significantly from the 2021 peak through 2024. And the EU's consumption in 2023 was around 333 BCM, down from 2022, according to the GECF gas market report. The IEA notes EU gas consumption rose around 1% in 2024, with industry partially recovering, even while gas-fired power demand fell due to renewables. So the real story is, Europe can reduce gas use, but it still needs gas as heating backup, industrial feedstock. Flexible power support when wind, solar are low. And if you cut a major supplier, the market doesn't say, congratulations on your values. The market says, pay more. So what does Putin's proposal actually mean? Putin's thinking out loud can be read in three ways. Option A, it's leverage, a signal meant to pressure Europe's debate and split the EU internally, especially where countries still rely on Russian flows and argue about timing. Reuters notes Europe's share of Russian gas fell to around 13% in 2025, but that still matters in tight conditions. Option B, it's preemption. If Europe is legally moving to ban Russian LNG and pipeline gas anyway, Russia may want to terminate early and pivot contracts to friendlier markets before it becomes chaotic. Option C, it's bargaining for exceptions. This is where Hungary and Slovakia matter. Some EU members still push for carve-outs or time shifts. Russia can keep supply to compliant partners while cutting hostile ones, politically and commercially. The EU's own law even contains mechanisms that acknowledge storage field difficulties could shift the deadline slightly. If you want the cold truth, energy is never just energy. It's a discipline system. The contract problem, penalties, force majeure, and legal war. The transcript you gave me points to something important: penalties and long-term contracts. Long-term LNG contracts exist. Yamal LNG output was largely contracted out to around 2038, according to an industry briefing on Novatek's Yamal LNG. Now the tricky part. If a company unilaterally refuses to supply, it can face arbitration and damages depending on contract terms. If a state bans imports, that can create force majeure or legal impossibility arguments, but it's messy and political. The EU's strategy itself has been designed partly to make contract termination legally defensible. Reuters previously reported the EU plan was structured to trigger force majeure-style justifications for ending contracts. So when Putin says, "Why wait? Let's stop now," he's not just talking politics. He's talking about who carries the legal and financial pain: Russia's exporters, European buyers, or force majeure chaos that nobody can fully control. Can Russia redirect LNG to Asia? Yes, but it's not frictionless. Novak is talking about redirecting volumes toward Asia-Pacific, but there are constraints. Sanctions on projects and shipping, constraints in LNG shipping availability and insurance, terminal access and regas capacity, payment mechanisms. At the same time, the Middle East crisis is driving shipping rates up and tightening LNG logistics. Reuters notes QatarEnergy offering tankers for lease amid soaring freight rates. So, Russia can pivot, but pivoting in a stressed global LNG market is like changing lanes in a traffic jam while someone is setting cars on fire. Possible, but not painless. The real punchline: Europe wanted a clean exit. Reality wants a messy one. Europe's plan was built on a controlled phase-out with alternative LNG arriving on schedule. Now we have Qatar LNG disrupted, force majeure declared, Europe scrambling for LNG cargoes to refill storage, Israel cutting off Leviathan production, and Egypt seeking more LNG. Russia signaling it could cut Europe first. So this is the real question for 2026. Does Europe still control the timeline of its energy independence, or has the market taken over? Because independence isn't a slogan, it's an operating condition. If the market is tight, and your storage is low, and your supply options are constrained, then your policy becomes reactive, not strategic. And that's when the entire debate changes from values to bills. What to watch next? Practical checklist. If you want to track who has leverage, watch these 4 things. 1. European storage levels through spring and early summer, how desperate the refill season becomes. 2. Qatar production restart timeline, weeks versus months, is the difference between painful and catastrophic. 3. EU implementation and carve-outs, Hungary, Slovakia legal pressure, and any delays tied to storage targets. 4. Russia's contract pivot speed, new long-term buyers in Asia Pacific, and logistics capacity. So no, this is not about morality. It's not even mainly about Russia versus Europe. This is about a simple reality. Energy policy is easy when supply is abundant. It becomes geopolitics when supply is tight. Europe wanted to phase out Russian gas on its own terms. Russia is now openly considering flipping the table early, and the global LNG system just lost one of its biggest pillars at the worst possible moment. If you want the next episode, we can go deeper into the uncomfortable part. How Europe's industrial base behaves when gas prices spike again, and why decarbonization becomes political suicide when voters meet winter. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want more systems-level energy politics without the fairy tales.